Okay, guys, regardless of the openings that you like to play, this is a game that you're going to enjoy a lot. Now, if you play the King's Indian Defense, of course, you need to know it. You have to review it multiple times because there's a lot to learn from Nakamura. So, in this game, of course, we're going to be using this feature from chess.com where they give you some feedback as you go through the moves. You're trying to guess every single move. Now, in this exercise, they start you off from this position. But of course, I wanted to show you from the very beginning. So this game, it's the King's Indian Defense. And you know that in this channel, we have an entire playlist on the King's Indian Defense and also on the peers. And I've told you before, the reason why I played them both is because they're very similar. So it's easier for me to know what to do against the Queen's Pawn opening or the King's Pawn opening. But anyhow, this game starts with d4. And pay attention, guys, to who Nakamura is playing against. He's playing against Boris Gelfand, a very strong player, and you're going to see what a beautiful game he played. So, knight f6, c4, g6. Now, if you remember, I told you when we learned this opening, I told you that I like to play g6 first, even though I want to get into the same thing. I just do g6 first because that way bishop g5 is not so annoying. If I did knight f6 first, I need to know how to play against bishop g5. Not a big deal. You could learn about it. I just didn't want to learn another line, right? So this is just a little tip in case you want to avoid it. It doesn't hurt to do g6 and then knight f6. Just keep in mind that it worked out for me perfectly because if they did e4, then I simply transpose into the peer's defense. But if you don't play the peer's defense, it could get tricky for you, okay? Now, with that said, we have g6, bishop g7. This is pretty standard. And then knight f3 is a classical variation. Guys, lesson number 85, I showed you a game where Kasparov got into this line. And he actually played it with e5 directly. Very aggressive game as well. You should be familiar with it. Now, on that same lesson, I showed you the way that I like to play it lately, which is with knight a6 first. And it's very interesting and less complicated than this one, right? So let me go back. And then we have e5, castle. And after knight c6, d5, we get the pawn structure that we have been talking about it so much. Not only on the King's Indian Defense lessons, but on other middle game strategy lessons like lesson number 91 and many more. So from this moment on, the pawn structure is going to indicate where you should attack. For the black pieces, it is aiming at the king side, so I should be attacking over there. And our target is going to be the pawn in front of our most forward pawn. So I need to do f5, expand, and of course I need to migrate my pieces to the king side. Everyone goes to the king side. Now for the white pieces, the pawn structure is aiming, it's aiming at the queen side. It's aiming at the queen side. So they should be trying to target my pawn on d6. This is the pawn in front of their most forward pawn, right? So this knight, where do I put it? Well, of course, I want to go towards the king side, just like that. So knight d2, look, the white pieces are doing the same thing, from the king side to the queen side. And since the center is locked, this is just the kind of planning that the game is asking for. So we got 98. 98, I know, a little bit counterintuitive if you're not a King's Indian Defense player, but it's just that we need to do f5. Sometimes we put the knight on h5. In this case, it doesn't make sense. And sometimes you even put it on d7, right? So 98, before immediately they start putting pressure, and then f5. Guys, from this moment on, this is a lot like what we covered on lesson 58, 59, 60 about opposite side castling attack. It is about who makes contact first. And in this case, if the white pieces make contact and they're successful, they're going to get probably material, they're going to promote a pawn. If the black pieces are successful, they're going to get checkmate on that king. And this is one of the reasons why I always liked the King's Indian Defense. I'm going for the king no matter what. So now we got c5. They finally make contact with my pawn. And now, guys, we can go to the exercise from chess.com. So here we are. And pay attention to these questions over here, right? So for this one, they're saying, what did Hikaru play to prepare his king side attack? Well, at this point, I'm going to invite you guys to pause the video as many times as you need and try to think of the answer on your own. And if you remember, you can let me know in the chat when you're done how many you got correct. Here, if I want to prepare that attack, I need pieces. So the next move for black is going to be knight f6. Now, again, I like this feature a lot because they give you feedback. And if you get it incorrect, you get to learn why, right? Now, after f3, we know, so I'm going to continue to expand f4 and pay attention to our bishop, how it continues to be locked, but it doesn't matter. This bishop, you're going to see the function that it has in this kind of attack, right? So after knight to c4, they're saying, how did he continue with the pawn storm? Well, look at this. The pawn in front of my most forward pawn is not this guy anymore. My most forward pawn all of a sudden is f4. So this is going to be my new target. I need to do g5, g4. So I'm going to go g5, and now a4, the white pieces are doing the same thing. And now the question is, how should the black pieces bring more pieces towards the king side? Now, this knight that came to e7 is now going to find a better square. So all of a sudden, my knights are going to get ready to help us on the king side. And guys, as I was learning the King's Indian defense, one of the things that I did a lot was to review games. And this is what I've told you, with regardless of the opening, you should be reviewing master games. And in every master game, I remember seeing this plan. Bring the knight back from c6 to e7, from f6 to e8, and then they'll deploy them back to the king side. So I knew this by heart. Now, after bishop a3, they're asking you, how can we include this rook into the game? And let me go back to the point that I said before. When you review master games, the most important thing is you're going to see when the opening theory is over, you're going to see what the typical plans are. So for many years, I saw this plan that you're going to see in a moment, which is rook f7, bishop f8, and then the rook swings over to the g file to attack. But I remember seeing some games where the rook would go to the sixth rank. So they'll go rook f6, rook g6. So that's something else that I learned from reviewing games, right? So anyhow, here they're asking me what to do with the rook. I know from before rook f7, so many games where I've seen this plan. And then maybe for you, this next move means nothing and you've seen it before, but I gotta tell you, when I saw this game, this was the first time that I saw something like this. When I learned the King's Indian defense, I knew that the golden rule, or one of the main rules, were to focus on your attack and do not move anything on the side where you're being attacked, right? And for the white pieces, the same thing. They're being attacked on the king side. They don't want to move any of these pawns unnecessarily because that only creates weaknesses. So for me, for many years, I would play my King's Indian defense, and whatever happened here, even if they'll put this pawn on b7, I would just continue on the king side, right? Hoping that my opponent wouldn't get me in trouble so quickly. But when I saw this game, it sort of opened up my mind. And again, it might seem obvious to you, but to me, it wasn't. I was blinded. So the move that he did here to resolve this tension was to take on c5. To me, I had never before seen a game, or I had never before tried taking on c5. To me, I had to wait like something like this. I would have done something like bishop f8, wait for them to take, and I'll keep it locked so that I could attack. Because one thing that I knew is that when I do this pawn storm and leave my king naked, I need to make sure that the center doesn't open up. If it opens up, then they could use diagonals to attack my king. So when I saw this game, it was really nice to see that he's allowed to do it, because if Nakamura did it, you can do it. And then after bishop c5, they're saying, how should the black pieces continue the attack? Well, at this point, you might be thinking of continuing with the pawn storm. That's valid if you're thinking of that. But instead, he decided to just prepare for the rook swing, right? So bishop f8, my bad. I thought so. That's not it. Now, in my defense, you can see here it says this is reasonable, so I'm not so bad, right? Okay, so this is not what they want. Instead, they continue with the pawn storm. So h5, sorry about that. Now, notice how after h5 and a5, they only say good move, keep it up. So that means continue to put pressure with the pawn storm. Now, after b6, of course, we're going to ignore it, and this is more what I'm used to. I see that they make contact. I'm going to stay still and hope that they don't get me in trouble with that before I get them in trouble. So now they're saying, how can you continue to open up the king side? Well, I'm going to finally make contact on g3. The white pieces, again, they're going to do the same thing I'm doing. They're not going to open up anything waiting for me to take, and then they use my own pawn as a shield. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, be very careful with leaving them or letting them do h3 and seal the king side. So moves like h4, you want to be careful. They do h3, and there's no way in for your pieces. So now they're saying the white pieces declined your offer, but Hikaru continued to attack. So what was the next move? Now, this next move, not a big deal if you didn't get it correct, because I understand we are so focused on attacking the king, the pawn storm, that we forget the plan that we mentioned before. The move here is simply bishop f8, and you see how this bishop, that it seems to be doing nothing, is going to find its way. Sometimes, if you remember from lesson 85, I think Kasparov put it on h6, and he found a good diagonal. Here, we're putting it on f8 to first let the rook come over, but at the same time, if I could trade it for this good bishop, that makes sense. So d6 was played, and now we do have to do something about it. Take your time. This is a good moment to imagine what Nakamura was going through in this game, right? Look at your candidate moves. Of course, we have pawn takes, pawn takes, pawn takes, or simply ignore it. In this game, they're saying, how did Hikaru defend, right? And the move here is a takes b6. So I got to do something about this. It is just too much. And now we continue to put pressure. So the question is, how can we create threats on the king side? Well, I already put my pawn on g3. I know that h4 is going to allow them to seal the king side. So I need to bring pieces. And that piece, if you remember, I think it was on lesson 69, I showed you a game with the Pierce defense that turned into this crazy attack similar to what we get in the King's Indian defense. And in that game, I did bring my knights closer to attack. So rook e1, and now finally, how do we blow open the king side? Guys, this next move, if you're not comfortable with it, you shouldn't play the King's Indian defense, because this is what it's all about. Energetic attack, and you need to know that if the attack fails, you're probably going to lose the endgame. And the move was, of course, knight g2. So they took on c7, and this is when the game becomes, you could say, a beautiful game. There are many King's Indian defense games where it's about this, sacrificing pieces and pawns and so on. But the way that Nakamura did it was in a way that I had never seen before. And here you can see how the pawn takes on c7. We don't really care about the pawn. It is blocked by the bishop, but our queen is being attacked. And it is very counterintuitive to leave the queen there. But Nakamura realized, hey, what if my knight went back and then I do pawn g2? Because this king's position is a little bit weird. Surrounded by the bishop, the pawn, and this will be, of course, checkmate. Now, of course, we don't have to go back. Instead, he left the queen there to simply capture the rook. And now I'm threatening checkmate. Now, notice how the bishop over here did not allow this capture with a check, right? So if the bishop went there, that would have been impossible to do. So queen offered, of course, they couldn't accept it because of the checkmate. But then here, instead of moving the queen again, Nakamura continued to do brilliant moves. And this is the difference between a super GM and the rest of us guys. And like I said before, and this is very important, he's playing another super GM, Boris Gelfand. So anyhow, here, instead of just taking the pawn or worrying about the queen, Nakamura continues to put pressure on that king. And the move was, of course, g2, just extracting that king, putting pressure. Notice that the moment every time we hit that king or we put pressure on it, this attack, these pieces on the queen side are paralyzed. And this is what we call having the initiative. So after the king takes, we continue with the check. Again, nothing that they could do with these pieces on the queen side, not even the queen. And now, one more time, we offered the queen for them to take, because bishop h3 is threatening checkmate on g2. And now, guys, take your time. Pause the video if you need to, because this next move is, I think, the best move that was played in this game. Notice that we really want to make this work, but the defender now is going to be the bishop. If I'm threatening something and my opponent has a defender, I need to think of eliminating the defender, deflecting that defender, obstructing the defender, anything to make that work. And in this case, Nakamura found queen d3. And the idea is simple. If they take, I'm deflecting the bishop, so I get to deliver checkmate. So at this point, the white pieces, they know they're in a lot of trouble, but they took on e5, of course. Taking the bishop would have been queen f3 checkmate. I mean, taking and followed by queen g2 checkmate. So after they did this move, we just have bishop takes, fair trade, but now we get the free knight. And of course, they have rook c1, we get another knight, and after c8, finally that pawn got to do something. You see, guys, look, when they are successful on the queen side, they get this. A pawn promoted, or they get one of my rooks on a8. If I'm successful, all I'm doing is, you see, checkmate threats, checkmate threats. So when they do this, we simply accept it, they take back, and then after queen e6, then the white piece is resigned. Why? They're down a piece, there's nothing for them, and queen e6 is not only attacking the rook, but it's preventing any counterplay with queen c4 and things like that. Now, there are two things that I want to tell you before I let you go, guys. Number one, don't think that don't think that every game that you play with the King's Indian defense is going to be as cool as this one. Many times I've played it and I have gotten nothing out of my attack. My opponent stops it and gets me in trouble on the queen side. I lose the game. But I have also gotten very nice games with these ideas. And then the final thing, don't forget, you could take this position and finish it against the engine. As winning as it is for the white pieces, the engine is going to find ways to complicate it, and it's going to allow you to practice your ability to convert an advantage like this into a win. So with that said, if you want to learn how to play the King's Indian defense, we have an entire playlist with every single variation that the white pieces could play against it. So check it out and let me know in the comments if you like this kind of video with this feature where they sort of walk you through and ask you questions, or if we should just leave it aside and do it the way that we typically do. But anyhow, see you on lesson number 151.